So next up is Adam Cronin. Where are my glasses? So Adam Cronin is head of offshore at DP Energy. He is leading the offshore team in the delivery of companies' offshore projects. In Ireland, DP Energy, in JV with Iberola, are developing 3 large-scale offshore wind projects, including a 1 gigawatt floating project off the Cork coastline.
Thank you very much. Who put me up after John? Anyway, do my best. Good morning, everyone. And I was going to have a go at the government representatives as well. I don't feel I can now. Thanks, John. Okay, so yeah, as John said, I work for a company called DP Energy. DP Energy are a renewable energy developer. They've been in Ireland for 30 years, so we're one of the oldest renewable energy developers in the country. And Cork-based, which I think is really good, and listening to and talking earlier during the week with some of the panel members here, I think Cork is very lucky because we have some great offshore renewable developers, one who want to be based out of Cork, ourselves and my colleagues from Simply Blue here today. We have John with Amarenco, although he's saying he doesn't want to come back and do any more here, but maybe that might change. We have the best port in the country for supporting offshore renewable, particularly the floating, and I will today talk a little bit about our Cork-based project, which is a floating wind project, even though we do have other projects in the pipeline as well. We are teamed, as John said, with Iberdrola, which is a very large, they don't like us to call them Spanish, international utility. And we partner with them because, no disrespect Mike, but they're not from an oil and gas background. We thought that was important to us, important to the ethos of Deep Energy. What do they bring to the table? They bring a huge amount of expertise in offshore wind, and they bring a huge checkbook as well, which is really important. These are big projects and they're expensive to develop. We work, DP operate internationally actually, from Buttevant, which I believe is the headquarters of all places, although the offshore team is based in Cork City. We've been very successful in Australia and Canada, and Ireland is the first place where we're doing offshore wind. We're also now actually looking at both Canada with support from the Canadian government and Australia at offshore floating wind as well. And why are we doing this? And John mentioned some of the targets earlier. We're obviously in the offshore wind sector, we're all looking at that 5 gigawatts wind by 2030, which is a government target. Every conversation I have with a government representative, I'll say, Deep Energy will of course meet that 2030 target and be operational. I don't believe any of the developers will, is the truth as well. I think it's a challenge, and I think that'll have to be pushed back. And I think that we need to have some real conversations about that, to look at it. 80% renewable energy by 2030. I would mirror John's concerns on that. These are challenging targets, and we might just touch on some of the difficulties that we have as a developer in reaching those targets, similar to what John would have had. Net zero by 2050. One of the interesting things is, capacity studies have seen there's 20 gigawatts potential energy off the west coast. And I remember as a very young engineer, and I didn't start off renewable energy, but I often thought, why don't we build windmills all along the west coast? I wasn't thinking offshore at all, just on the coast. Build windmills all the way and pipe all electricity over to Europe. That seemed to make sense to me at the time. And we have an opportunity in Ireland to do that if we take it seriously. We don't need electricity ourselves, to be honest, in the future, but Europe does, the rest of the world does, and we must move away from fossil fuels, reliance on dictators on the other side of the world. Our joint venture arrangement at the moment with Iberdrola, we have 3 projects in the pipeline, East Coast, West Coast and South Coast. The South Coast, I'm not saying it just because I'm here today and live in Cobh, but the South Coast is our flagship project. It's a floating offshore wind project. There aren't very many of these in the world, and the ones that do exist are quite small. So this is a big project. 1 gigawatt, 800,000 homes or 2 coal-fired power stations capacity. Why did we pick Cork? We picked Cork for a number of reasons. We picked it because we have a port here that has deep water. We picked it because we have good access or potentially good access to grid. We picked it because we've got great wind speeds, and we picked it because there's a history of industrial activity in Cork. And there are other developers clustered around off the mouth of the harbour as well in this area. But this is our flagship project. We're very excited to work on this project. Just a little bit more detail about what's known as the Inishalga project, and I've left some brochures outside you can take away with a bit more information. So that looks like a very scary map there, and that's not the area we're going to be filling with turbines, that's for sure. these really are the investigative areas, and we have applied for our foreshore license. We don't have it yet, but then we only applied in 2019, so I suppose, we'll get it yet. The grey areas where the turbines will be, the floating units will be, something between 60 and 70 units depending on turbine size. The red area is where the cables are going to go ashore. Not the full area, but we're obviously examining a huge area. There's a massive job of work to do to look at all the environmental impacts and other impacts indeed as well, to pick the best route to shore. Realistically, we're going to be coming into one of the substations, be that Rafine, Hada, Knockrahow, wherever. Same as the other developers are looking at. We're quite advanced at this early development stage of the project. As I say, the foreshore license is imminent. We've been carrying out aerial bird and mammal surveys for the last year, landside ecology surveys, and we're acquiring land for landfalls and cable routes back to the stations as well. We're spending about €1.5 million a month in this project. We're employing directly 22 people in Cork City, but indirectly with all the consultants and surveyors, that's probably 60 or 70 people indirectly employed as well at this stage. And our ambitious program, I think with John all the time, our ambitious program is COD by 2030. That means us making kind of a financial decision sometime in 2017. But what are our hurdles to that? And there are significant hurdles. And I will say that I'm an ex-Department of Marine engineer, and I've been working the 1933 Foreshore Act for years. And it's a terrible piece of legislation in some respects, and it's great that we have new legislation. It's only taken, 70 years to get it, 80 years. But what we have now looks very, very good. But we need MARA set up, and we need MARA set up sooner rather than later. We also, and while we have that legislation, and that's good, the Planning Act seriously has to be looked at. And John mentioned fast-track planning. You're right, around the world, around Europe in particular, this fast-track planning and judicial reviews have to be removed from the process, as simple as that. And I don't understand how, we say, we have to watch every single thing we do, everybody has to be respected, every piece of nature and ecology has to be respected. And I would absolutely applaud that. But at what price? At what price we don't build these developments? We just carry on the trajectory we're on. It's just not viable. Just a bit of a graphic there, to see some of the components. It's hard for us, indeed, let alone the general public, to understand how big these floating units are. They're very, very big. I was talking to Pat Brennan from DSG earlier, and you'll all have driven in and you've seen the cranes that are being assembled in Doyle Shipping Group, which I think, Pat, is 65 metres high, and the tip heights of these will be almost 300 metres high. So these are very, very big structures. And they need to be that big because they're going to go out, they're going to go 22 kilometres off the coastline. So that's pretty hairy wave and wind activity out there. They need to be that size to be efficient, so we can put turbines of a sufficient size on top to be efficient in terms of the overall project. It's about a 2 billion spend for Iberdrola, which is very significant, maybe even more than that, the way prices are going. It's a major piece of work that has to be carried out. We obviously, as well as the infrastructure, it's not just the floating turbines. We'll have a substation at sea, which will connect back to the substation on land, and then we need fairly substantial land-based infrastructure for construction. Obviously, is a big process over a 2 or 3 year period, but also for a 30 to 60 year operational phase as well. And just a few numbers on jobs. There are no great figures on a floating offshore project at this stage because it hasn't been developed yet. But looking at offshore wind projects internationally, in Europe in particular, a project like this will probably create 3,500 jobs during construction for that 3 years. Now, they won't all be in Ireland, they certainly won't all be in Cork, but it'll create that. It'll create 100 plus direct O&M jobs, which will be based in Cork Harbour, is our hope. With that 100 direct jobs, there's another times 600 jobs, indirect jobs then supporting the farm for that 60 years. So I think it's quite important. It's quite an important project for Cork and for the country, and it's ticking all the boxes on renewable, obviously, which we all know about. So this is my last slide here, and we have done some early stage photo montages of the development because that's what the public always wanted to know. What does this look like? And this is one shot from Myrtleville. I use this one because it's one of the ones that's closest to the farm, to be fair, rather than take one that's much further away. You won't see it from within the harbour here, obviously, so that's interesting. But you can barely see it as it is. There are other viewpoints we have up on the website, which is obviously go and have a look and see it. We have a long way to go. with this project. There are major benefits for Cobh, for Cork Harbour, for Cork and the country, and in fact Europe. And what we would be asking, I have lots of asks, but John has already asked a lot in terms of what government need to do. We really need to fast track, or we'll miss out. One of my big concerns is the UK in particular are far ahead of us in programme and development and facilities, and there's a lot of opportunities for developers, including Iberdrola in Scotland in particular. There's many gigawatts of leases being given out in Scotland. They've nowhere for the electricity to go in Scotland, so I have a real fear they'll drop it down to Northern Ireland, onto this island, and then projects like this and projects like Val and Brian's project, the emphasis will be there to actually get those off the ground. So thank you very much, and there's brochures outside if anybody wants it.